Hello, and welcome to Campfire. We are so glad you're here tonight. My name is Molly Pearson, and I am Campfire's training and education lead, and I had the pleasure of co-teaching this advanced storytelling cohort. So first, let's do some introductions. Tonight, you will be hearing stories from Grace, Lizzie, Katie, and Noki. Let's also meet the Campfire team. Tonight, we have Mariah, Stephen, Jeff, and Dan. And they are all working behind the scenes as we speak to make this event run as smoothly as possible. That said, if any viewers from home need any technical support whatsoever, you can send a text message to 314-325-4287, and someone from our team will help you out. While this is our second virtual capstone event this year, please extend some grace our way. Tech can be full of surprises. Again, my name is Molly, and I had the pleasure of co-teaching this season's Advanced Storytelling class. And all of the storytellers you will hear from tonight previously completed Intro to Storytelling, which is the stepping stone course that leads up to Advanced. So if you like what you see tonight, we encourage you to sign up for our next Intro to Storytelling class that begins on October 25th. So before we dive into our stories tonight, at Campfire, we believe that stories are essential to creating change. Stories give us meaning, stories give us connection, and stories impact both the listener and the teller. We need stories, perhaps now more than ever. Let's just name it. There is a ton of really bad stuff going on in the world. Too many bad things to list right now, right here. So let's just own it and let's ground ourselves. So let's honor this time tonight as we take a reprieve from the hard stuff. So on the count of 3, let's take a collective deep breath and settle into this space together. 1, 2, 3. Thank you. We are so glad you're here. Our storytellers are glad that you're here. Campfire works toward a world where we are prepared to lend our voices whenever we are inevitably called upon to do so. We do this by elevating everyday stories through our classes, trainings, coaching, and fellows program. We then amplify those voices through our social media, letters to the Campfire email list, and the Campfire at Home podcast. So tonight is the capstone event of our advanced storytelling class. So all of the storytellers you will hear from tonight just completed the advanced course. And the students that you'll hear from tonight signed up for class way back at the beginning of 2020. We held one class in April in person, and then the pandemic settled into our bones as reality. We postponed the rest of the classes to the summer, hopeful that we could return to in-person classes by then. When it became inevitable that the pandemic would continue to wreak havoc on our daily lives, we went ahead with holding the class online. All this to say, this night has been a really long time coming. Over 6 class sessions, after a brief refresher on what we learned in Intro to Storytelling, we took a deep dive into ensuring that as public speakers, our intentions align with our impact. We also practiced learning to really listen and love our own voices. Students also practice giving and receiving constructive peer feedback throughout the course. This process required deep reflection centered on the season theme, false narratives. Unfortunately, I realize that your screen says light and shadow. Oops, that's on us. This dawned on us just before showtime, and full transparency, that is a theme from another event. Again, we humbly ask for your grace. Tech is full of surprises. So each story you will hear tonight represents a different interpretation of false narratives and how false narratives impact our lives. This brings us to the campfire before you tonight. Our students had been carrying these stories within them already. We just helped bring them out. So tonight's event will have 4 storytellers, each telling a 10-ish minute story. But this is important. I ask all of our viewers at home to listen, to understand, and to be present. I encourage you to take a moment, wherever you are, pick up that phone and put it on silent and mute any notifications. Let's relish this opportunity to turn off distractions and really show up. As each storyteller shares, their video will be expanded full size. While they share, on the right-hand side of your screen, you will see two thumbnail-sized videos. Those videos are of the next storyteller who is on deck and me, yours truly. As you view from home, we also invite you to participate in your own way. There are two ways that you might be viewing tonight. From our brand new virtual theater at campfireathome.com or on your smart TV using the YouTube app. For those of you viewing on the Campfire at Home website, you will see a clap button immediately below the video. Use it and use it as often as you want. When you hear something that moves you, that you agree with, or words that just make you feel something, clap away. Clapping for all storytellers is a norm that we have here at Campfire. And so for us on this side of the screen, we will be clapping in our own way using sign language. So if the storytellers tonight could help me demonstrate, that looks like this. Another way to create community tonight is to send a note of support and affirmation directly to a storyteller. So if you're watching from campfireathome.com from a computer, tablet, or phone, you can use the feature immediately below the video to select the name of the storyteller from the drop-down menu and send a note of support. It will automatically reload in a couple seconds, or you can click reload so you can send in another one. For folks who are viewing on a smart TV using the YouTube app, you can text notes of support and affirmation to 314-325-4287. If you text, just make sure to tell us who it's for, and we will be reading a few of the notes of support and affirmation out loud tonight. And we will compile all affirmations and send them along to each storyteller after tonight is over. So regardless of how you're tuning in tonight, whether you're at the Campfire at Home website or if you're on YouTube, you can always text 314-325-4287 for text support, as well as texting in affirmations. Your active participation in sending in these affirmations is super important. When we gather for a campfire in person, we are known for cultivating a warm feeling of community. And although we must be physically distanced from one another right now, your interaction, either through the Campfire at Home site or through text message, will help to cultivate that same warmth and sense of community that a campfire event is known for. So, without further ado, let's begin. Our first storyteller at the campfire tonight is Grace. On deck is Lizzie.
Thanks, Molly. You don't remember this night, but Patrick, this was a defining moment in our relationship. It was late, you had just gotten home, I was in bed, you were taking off your shoes and placing them in the closet. You turned around and started pacing the width of our room back and forth. You were moving through the process that we had to do of getting your dad out of the month-long stay at the hospital and successfully moved to the however long stay at the rehab nursing home. I don't know if it was the movement of your body back and forth, or maybe just the stress that you and I had both been under. But your track of thought changed, and you started talking about your relationship with your dad and asking these questions. Now, my brain even actually tries to close down as I try to remember, because the questions that you were asking were so intimate. They were so ingrained in me. But you were walking through your dad's decisions, his choices, and these questions that they were like, how the hell did we get here? How did this happen? How in the world could we have prevented this? How could we protect your dad? How could we protect you? How could you protect us? I'll speak from experience that these questions that you ask of or to an alcoholic or an addict very rarely are ever answered. But nevertheless, you were asking them. And I was so enthralled and in awe of you. And as you were moving back and forth like these waves, I was moving with you. And within an instant, I began to feel these hands pulling on my brain, trying to get my attention. And I batted them away. I pushed them down because I was with you. I was with you, processing, listening. I had never heard anyone do this before. But the hands came back, and they came back with force, and I subsided under the wave, and I went into my mind to follow those hands and see who and where they connected to. To no surprise, they were connected to me. They were connected to young Grace, about 11, 12 years old. I found myself crying in my closet at my childhood home, 9403 Vickery, the big green house on the hill. A few moments prior to finding myself in the closet, my parents had just sat down, myself and my two oldest siblings, to tell us that my sister Emmy, who I'm the youngest of four and she's the next in line, 8 years between us, Emmy had just been arrested. She was on her way to Truman State University, and she got pulled over in Macon, Missouri, with a bong and some weed on her. Pretty surprising of a college student. But growing up with Emmy, and at that time especially, our relationship was pretty bad. We fought every day, and to make it even more dramatic, our bedrooms were on either side of the house. So just imagine the slamming of the doors, the stomping of the feet, the constant contest to win. It was like WWE on Friday night, every night. But I grew up fighting. I grew up fighting my sister, I grew up fighting my family, and I grew up fighting myself. And while fighting with my family was relatively normal, fighting with my sister was on a whole different level. And a lot of the times, it was because we could see each other. And I mean that in the way that I saw how she was different. I saw what I, as a child, interpreted as fighting tactics, personality changes, outbursts, behavior shifts. I now know that those were indicators of mental health. But at the time growing up, those were the hot buttons that we pressed on each other. But after being told that my sister had been arrested, um, I did what I normally would do. I closed up, I walked upstairs, and I released privately internal processor. I don't know if it was something that broke, something that shifted, something that softened. But in that moment of me sitting down on my knees in my closet, I could see the root of my and my sister's relationship. And the only thing there was love. I emulated her. I wanted to be her. She was brilliant and beautiful and confident and everything that young Grace was not. But as I sat there, I started asking questions, and Patrick, they were verbatim the exact same questions that you were asking yourself. How could this have been different? What could I have changed? How could she have done something different, maybe a few days, weeks ago? Why didn't I protect her? I knew all of her fighting tactics. Why didn't she protect herself? And answer, the answer that I left myself with for years was that I, young Grace, had failed to protect my sister. I began to hear you again, Patrick. I began to hear your voice. I was coming back to our bed and our bedroom and our two dogs, and I could see you again. And I could hear you. And you were talking about forgiveness and acceptance and things that I just, I was just in awe of you again. I couldn't fathom because Patrick, you did things that night, intentional or not, but you chose to acknowledge your and your father's relationship. You named and questioned out loud, articulating these thoughts. And you connected with someone outside of yourself. All of these things that I had never practiced or even thought to put in place until that moment where I came face to face with myself and saw the shame that I had been carrying like a blanket, the shame that has built walls and broken relationships. That night, you helped me meet myself. You helped me connect with someone outside of myself and accept these things that I could never control. So I don't know if you'll ever get your answers to these questions. Maybe you will. But Patrick, as we swim closer to August 28th, 2020, our wedding, I just want you to know that any question that weighs you down, any story that makes you feel shitty, I will always be here and I will always listen. Thank you.
Let's give it up for Grace. So use this moment to send Grace a note of affirmation using the drop down menu on the Campfire at Home website, um, or by clapping using the clap button, or sending a text to the number listed on your screen. Next up to the campfire is Lizzie, and on deck is Katie.
In Uruguay, they have this tradition called Cambonde. And Cambonde, like a lot of current cultural events, has kind of a sordid origin, but nowadays it's like a street performance and parade wrapped into one. They have big events during Carnival every year, and to practice for those, groups gather in different neighborhoods on Sunday evenings. And a Cambonde looks like a big group of people, half dancing, half walking down the street to a band of drums in the front and these flags the size of cars waving on the edges of the crowds. I got to experience one about 5 years ago, and it's an incredibly vibrant scene. You follow behind the music and can't help but feel this sense of community. Although that sense of community could also have been from the edibles we'd eaten before we went. So I was on this trip to South America with my friend Celine, and she really wanted to stop in Uruguay. And I didn't mind. An old classmate of mine, Miguel, was studying there, so we included it in our plans. It wasn't until we arrived that I learned part of the reason she wanted to go was because weed was legal there. So we did like any good American tourist would do. We bought some marijuana infused cookies, ate them on a rooftop with Miguel and his roommate, and went to the Cambonde. A few months before this, Celine and I met at Urban Chestnut in the Grove, and she told me that she had a few months before starting her second year of grad school and was thinking about planning a trip to South America. She asked if I wanted to join her. And it's good to note that Celine she's one of my most adventurous friends. She is always in search of a new experience. And I envy that in her. I really do. Um, but overall, I would say I am a bit more calculated. I am just not a person who thrives in a lot of uncertainty. And when she asked if I wanted to go, I got this gut feeling in my stomach. You know, those feelings when your body's trying to give you a hint, but it keeps it subtle. So you can listen or you can not listen. I was 25 at the time and living in St. Louis, working in community education. I had never really envisioned living here as an adult. I grew up here, and after being away for a few years, came back and kind of got a job and got settled. And things were good. I liked my life, but I was feeling directionless. So when she asked if I wanted to take this trip, I noticed that gut feeling, but I said yes anyways. I said yes to this trip, and I said yes to opening myself up to change. And I thought I would use it as this start to a new chapter. So I uprooted all these big things in my life. I didn't renew my lease and moved back to my parents' house. I took a leave from my job. I'm not sure if I would go back or not. And I left things ambiguous with the person I was dating. I had 3 weeks to explore and figure it out. The problem is that figuring it or life out doesn't really happen on timelines we make for ourselves. So I had suspended these big parts of my life, got on an international flight, and thought I would come back with some clarity. Celine had left a few days before me, so I flew alone. And when I walked off the plane in Buenos Aires, I had this knot in my stomach. It reminded me of when I would get homesick when I was little, which admittedly happened a lot. I would agree to go to sleepovers and have to call my parents before bed to pick me up. I even got teary eyed when Mrs. Hunt picked us up for carpool some mornings. So, like, all of a sudden, I'm in this airport in Argentina feeling like I'm 8 years old again. I took a deep breath and I had the address to the hostel, and Celine was there waiting for me. So, I got a taxi and I went there. When I opened the door to the lobby, Celine was sitting there just as she should be. And this wave of relief came over me. The knot went away, and I thought, this is going to be fine. So I took a shower to kind of get settled, took my travel size Dr. Bronner's, and watched the water washing over my flip flops, just hoping I'd made a good choice. We had a lot of fun over those next few weeks. We got to explore new cities and just try different things and met people from all over the world. But every morning I would sit down to journal and I kept writing down the same things. I was happy to be there, but I was nervous about how I left things so open back home. I didn't know what change I was looking for, and I certainly didn't know how to find it. And so instead of taking in the sights and sounds of where I was, I had my head in my journal, just worried about my return home. In one of the cities we stayed in, Salta, we rented an Airbnb, which was a little treat to ourselves after all the hostels. And after the first night there, Celine woke up sick to her stomach. So I helped her get settled, and I went out to take a walk so she could rest. I went to this art gallery we'd passed the afternoon before, and I'm looking through sort of absentmindedly, looking at these pieces, and I turn this corner and I see this print called Sensible Chaos. And I stop and I look, and honestly, the image doesn't even really resonate with me. It's those words that stick out, sensible chaos. That knot sort of comes back to my stomach as the phrase sinks in. Chaos as a concept to me feels like something you can't create if you're being intentional. And I had been intentional. Had I been intentional? I had heard my gut tell me this wasn't the time or the way, and I ignored it. I knew I didn't do well with a lot of uncertainty, and yet I left with all these big parts of my life unresolved. I had tried to make sensible choices, but really I had just made a big mess. It's funny, when I was little, I used to wonder why my parents kept letting me go to sleepovers. Like, why not avoid the inevitable? But I know now that if they had said to me, no, you can't go to Katie's because we don't want to pick you up later, I never would have tried again. But I could go and I could try because I knew they were there if I needed them, and home was there if I needed it. And I realized, standing in that gallery with that knot in my stomach and those words in my head, that I needed home. So I walk back to the Airbnb and I sit outside with a cup of coffee to think. But halfway through that cup, my own stomach starts to turn, and I run inside to the bathroom, make it just in time, and then collapse next to Celine in this big bed we were sharing. We had some food poisoning that laid us out for like 30 hours, just taking trips to the bathroom and watching Modern Family episodes on our phones for comfort. When the worst of it had passed, Celine and I talked about our plans, and I told her I was going to change my flight and leave a week early. In some ways, it felt like I was letting myself down by going, but really, it was the most sincere decision I'd made about that whole trip. I was finally listening to myself and to what I needed, and that felt really good. It sounds kind of simple to say, but it's brave to listen to that inner voice. It's brave to say no to something that sounds fun, like a big trip, if it's just not right. And it's brave to get on a 13-hour flight if you're still recovering from food poisoning. And that's exactly what I did. As I settled into that seat, I sent a word up to whatever higher power was listening to make it back without any incident. And I went home.
Great. Thank you, Lizzie. So let's take this moment to offer Lizzie a note of affirmation and support. So if you're on the Campfire at Home website, you can use the drop-down menu, or you can send a text message to the number on your screen. Up next to the campfire is Katie, and on deck is Noki.
The sun shone down upon us from its perch in the Mediterranean sky as we trekked through the city of Rome. My class and I had taken a weekend trip led by our instructor to Rome from where we were studying and pursuing our degrees in architecture in Florence, Italy. We were doing a semester abroad. And as we trekked through the city of Rome, we saw so many things. It was almost as if we were trying to see everything in 48 hours, which is just impossible. By the time we got to our last stop at Trajan's Market, we had seen things like the Campidoglio, which was a plaza designed by Michelangelo, and the Trevi Fountain. And we saw the Ecstasy of St. Teresa and the Pantheon. And I was just having a wonderful time, surprised at the feeling that Rome was more attractive to me and like a home base to me than Florence was. And during my time in Trajan's Market, that really only solidified for me. It was our last stop of the day, and once our instructor departed for the evening, we were able to do whatever we wanted. However, it was a weird time of the afternoon, too early for dinner, but too late to really do anything else. And so we all decided to take a rest. It was much needed. It had been hot that day, and something you don't realize about the stones you walk on until you're in the situation is that they do retain that heat. And so you get heat from above and from below, and it's somewhat inescapable, even in the shade, because that shade was once in the sun. And so we sort of sat in a shadier part of the market. And as we were sitting there, though, I was growing more and more restless. I couldn't believe that we were taking precious minutes to just rest, even though that's important and a healthy thing to do. In my brain, I wanted to go and do more and see more because I actually was also studying archaeology, not while I was abroad. That was a semester totally devoted to architecture, my first degree. But archaeology was a study I took up during my second year in college after I realized that maybe architecture wasn't the choice for me. It was the sensible choice. And even though I was getting cold feet, I was not committed to those feelings enough at the time to really stop pursuing architecture. I wanted the security net of knowing I had a job waiting for me after school. It was nervous for me to think about, what would I do with my degree if I had pursued archaeology as an actual as my degree instead of just a second major. And so you can understand now why I was just absolutely loving Rome. I loved looking out, the old meshed with the new, and the urban fabric, how it interwove the archaeology with the modern life of the city. And it was just fascinating to me. And the building we were in was fascinating to me as well, but I didn't really realize that. I wasn't present enough to realize that until my friend Eleanor and her partner Erin got up and left the group to take a walk on their own. And I was like, wait a second, I can do that too. I can still think for myself. I don't have to just do what everyone else does. And so I decided to take a walk too in a different direction. And I found myself on a portico surrounded on one side by small market stalls that would have been used by the vendors during the ancient Roman times. You see, Trajan's Market has also been coined the first shopping mall because it was a permanent structure that was made for a marketplace, and it had multiple levels to it, and it was truly an incredible structure. It had all of the classic Roman trademarks like the barrel vault and the arches and bricks and cement, which, believe it or not, the ancient Romans used a lot of cement, and I think they created cement or discovered it. And so you see it a lot with ancient Roman ruins. And so I was just really enjoying being in this space and also noticing the traces that the people who used to occupy the space left behind, like the marks on the floor where the divider between patron and customer was set every day. And, you know, those marks on the floor were special to me because they were the way that those people left some of their energy in the space. It takes energy to lift that barrier and put it back in place every day. And this was the sort of philosophy that drew me the most to archaeology. It was the energy that it took to make a clay pot, and then the energy that was used to, when it was being used and left in it, that was then transferred to me when I excavated it or looked at it in a museum or was in that same place at the same, not at the same time, that's impossible, but you know, was in the same place as all of those people. And that human connection is so, so important to me. And I was feeling even more connected with people as on my right side, there were arches that were open to below. I was on the second level and I could hear people milling through the Roman Forum and also through Trajan's Forum, which was literally right beneath me. And I could hear them speaking all of their different languages. And I really felt connected and that this was the place where I was to be in this moment. And while I was thinking all of this, I could also hear the notes of Leonard Cohen's Hallelujah sort of wafting up from below. There was a street performer I could point out. And as I was listening to this, I was thinking about how sentimental it is to me. And looking at Trajan's column, that was also in Trajan's Forum, which I could see from the marketplace, and looking even further beyond at the monument to Vittore Emanuele II, the man who unified the country of Rome, and watching the sun gleam off of its golden statues and its marble surface. And all of a sudden, without any warning really, I had tears rolling down my cheeks. And I ducked into one of the market stalls for a little bit of privacy and just let myself feel the moment because I was alone. There was no one else in sight. And before I knew it, I was Kim Kardashian ugly crying in the middle of this marketplace. And there was really no stopping it. I just let it go. And like the tears were rolling down my cheeks. I could feel my face turning red. The snot was just like coming out of my nose. It was disgusting. I'm so glad no one saw it. And as this was happening so unprovoked, I was asking myself, well, what is the cause? Was I hungry? No. Was I thirsty? No. Was I tired? Yes, but that wasn't it. But maybe it was that I was tired, but not in the physical sense. I was tired of pursuing something that wasn't for me, because screaming in my head, all I could think was, I love the old things. All I want to do is appreciate the old things. I don't want to make new things. And what really happened in that moment, even though to anyone on the outside, it just looked like a blubbery mess. And if you had been able to read my thoughts at that moment, it probably would have been completely incoherent. But what really happened in that moment was I decided that I needed to stop making excuses to remain in a career path where I didn't belong. Some problems I had had with architecture that had been mounting for a while really crystallized for me in that moment. And I just decided to quit ignoring them. And so as soon as I returned to Florence, I went ahead and switched my degree track so that I could have more flexibility in my last semester of college. And as I walked down the aisle and across the stage on graduation day, I was so nervous. I did not feel at all prepared to enter into the job field that I didn't even know what I wanted to do. Like, I wasn't ready to enter the real world at this moment in time. But what I did know is that I was going to be happy. I was going to be able to get up and go to work at a place where I loved, at a place where I had the opportunity to intern the past semester because I gave myself that flexibility. And I was going to have to work 7 days a week to make ends meet. And it was going to be tough. And I had really sacrificed that foundation, not really foundation, but just stability that I had thought was so necessary. But what finally occurred to me is that I couldn't buy my own happiness. And so it didn't matter how much money I was making or how stable my life was. It just mattered that I could get up and do what I was being paid to do every morning. And even though I exited that stage and that chapter of my life not knowing where I was headed, it completely paid off. As this past week, I just started my dream job, and it'll be a wonderful stepping stone into an incredible future. And I can only thank myself for giving myself that flexibility and also letting the city of Rome speak to me in that moment in Trajan's Market. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Katie. So for viewers at home, take a moment and send Katie a note of affirmation if you're on the Campfire at Home website. You can do that from the drop-down menu on the website, or you can send in a text message to the number on your screen. Up next to the campfire, last but certainly not least, is Noki.
My best friend Amelia swears she wasn't flirting with me the night that we met. It was my first trans support group, and I was incredibly nervous because I just knew that I would show up and everyone would just see right through me, right? Like I'm not trans enough, I'm not queer enough. But I showed up and everyone was incredibly, kind and supportive. But there was this one person in particular with dark curly hair and super cute freckles who was giving the most empathetic and intentional feedback. And, right away, I just felt connected to Amelia's warmth and intelligence. After group, we all went out to this local cafe and I was running late. So when I walked in, I noticed that the table was already completely full and it just brought up all those emotions all over again, right? Like I don't fit here, I don't belong. But of course, somebody looked up and smiled and said, hey, Noki, grab a chair and we'll make room for you. And they did. But the last 2 hours had been incredibly exhausting, right? Like sitting in a bright room with a bunch of strangers being incredibly vulnerable. So I was just sitting there quietly, hoping that I didn't come off as weird, until I felt someone breeze by me on the left. And I heard the scraping of a chair and, I heard it being sat down next to me. And I look over and it's Amelia. She has this great way of just drawing people out and making them feel comfortable. And pretty soon, I was jumping into conversations about books and board games and getting to ask questions about the trans experience, which was, why I was there in the first place. Eventually, the cafe closed down and we all went outside. And at this point, I am well beyond exhausted, but I felt like, I'd just gotten this foothold into this group of, courageous and beautiful women, and I didn't want to give it up just yet. So I stuck around. Even as other people, trickled out to their cars, I stuck around until it was just me and one other person. And of course, that one other person was Amelia. She asked where my car was parked, and I said, 2 or 3 blocks away. And she asked if I needed a ride, and I said yes. And when we get, to my car, instead of giving me the signal for like, hey, we've been hanging out a while, it's super late, get the hell out of my car, she started up another conversation. And I can't remember exactly how long we talked, but eventually I realized that it's super late and that I, had completely forgotten how tired I was. And so I thanked her and I drove home. I am someone who keeps a meticulous diary. And so recently I went back to that day and among the anxiety and just the sheer joy of that evening, it was very clear to me that I had a thing for Amelia. And I thought, with all the attention she was giving me, that she was flirting with me too. But what I didn't know about Amelia, yet is that she has this magic power where if there's anyone in her orbit who's struggling, she will zero in on them and give of herself and make sure that they feel safe and welcome. But I was oblivious, right? Like I was just like, Supergirl, super cute girl was flirting with me. It's so fun, so awesome. And so the next week, I was really excited to go to group, and I was excited to see Amelia. While she was talking, she mentioned that she played music. And I thought I'd be real clever, right? I'd be real slick. And so in my feedback to her, I said, well, I also play an instrument, and maybe we should, hang out at your house sometime and jam out. And then I realized what I'd just done. I just flirted with Amelia in front of this entire room of people I'm just getting to know. But Amelia just looked at me, and she smiled that smile where her eyes closed almost all of the way. And she said, yeah, we should definitely hang out. So we made plans for that weekend. I ended up getting sick, so we had to reschedule. But instead of putting off our friendship, we started texting. And I went back into my diary, and it says that we talked from noon until 10:30 p.m. And the last line in that entry said that I can't be 100% certain, but this definitely feels like flirting. So we kept talking throughout the week, and the day finally came. And once again, I was incredibly nervous because Amelia is a real musician. She plays all these instruments, she's been in bands, she's recorded albums. And I realized all of a sudden, like, I haven't played the piano in years, right? Like, it's just the worst flirt I possibly could have chosen. So when I show up and she's like, hey, grab your equipment, let's go downstairs and get set up. I was like, well, how about instead of doing that thing, that we've been talking about for 2 weeks, why don't we just stay up here and sit on the couch and get to know each other better? But she was so great about it. She got me some wine and we sat down on her couch. Like any one-on-one, platonic situation you hope is actually a date or might actually turn into a date, I started off with the safe and broad topics. And after a while, I could have sworn that we were getting closer on the couch. And then we, moved into the hopes and dreams part of the conversation, and we got a little bit closer on the couch. And then both of our banter games just went through the roof, right? Like we're cracking each other up, we're having so much fun, and we're definitely getting closer on the couch. And there is no way that Amelia can deny her flirtations that night, because all of a sudden she pulled me into her arms and she kissed me deeply. And then I freaked out. There were a lot of things going on in my life in that moment, but my biggest, unspoken fear was I didn't know what our sex would look like. Hormone therapy affects us in big ways and small ways. And lately, my body hadn't been as cooperative in the bedroom. Not to mention, I had this, growing up in this deeply Southern Baptist, architecture around sex and sexuality that I was, having to heal from my entire life. But the biggest thing for me was I had been in heteronormative relationships my entire life. And so what did I know about queer intimacy? Nothing really. And so I looked at her and I said, I am sorry, but I don't think I'm ready for this yet. And she was hurt, and I was so embarrassed. And you'd think, right, like this would just make our friendship just way more casual, right? We talk after group, or maybe we text from time to time. But that night set off this cycle of over and over again, where we'd hang out as friends. And then maybe, we might cuddle up as friends, and then maybe we'd start smooching just as friends, of course. And then one of us would say, like, hey, we're having so much fun hanging out as friends, why don't we try dating again? But inevitably, one of us would freak out. And so the cycle continued. But eventually we did make it back to Amelia's bedroom. And after the kissing and all of the heavy petting, reached that moment of no return, I froze up and I pulled away and I moved my body to the edge of her queen size mattress, and I put my arms under my body and I looked away from her towards the wall. And I thought, this is it, right? This is the moment when she decides that she just can't do it anymore. But Amelia did exactly what Amelia does best. And just like that night, that we first met, she asked if I needed help. And I said yes. And she asked if she could touch me. And I said yes. And so she put her fingers on my back and she was soothing me and caressing me. And I turned my head towards her and I smiled. So she, picked up the pace. And eventually, I start making those intimate sounds, right? That let your partner know, like, hey, you're doing something real good. Don't stop, right? Um, and so she started moving her hands all over my body and in these intricate patterns. Um, and eventually she lifted her hands from my body. And I noticed that there was this swirling ball of energy in my chest. And I've never experienced pleasure that intense. Certainly not from simple touch, but definitely not, something that just hung there in the body. And so, I let Amelia know what was going on, and instantly, right? She put on her scientist cap and was like, "We are going to figure this thing out." So she starts touching my neck, and I feel the energy move to my stomach. And she touches my arm, and I feel the energy, shoot up my legs. And she's like, "What if I, touch your arm and your leg at the same time? And what if I swirl on your chest like clockwise and then counterclockwise? And then what if?" And what if, and what if, until we just collapsed into a heap of ecstasy. And then we pulled out our phones, right? Like, and let me tell you, trying to, search the internet for what had just happened without already knowing exactly what this whole tantric thing's about was damn near impossible. But I felt in that moment like everything was going to be okay. Even though it would take us month after month after month trying to figure out if we were more than just friends, I knew that there were other ways to love. And it was going to be this awesome adventure getting to figure them all out. And from time to time, Amelia and I would get together and we would explore those possibilities together. Until one morning, we've been hanging out day and night for 2 weeks. And Amelia sits up in bed, and there's this, beautiful sunlight streaming through her stained glass windows and illuminating those curls that I just adore so much. And she asked me, is this the time? Is this when we finally get together for real? Nothing has ever been, so easy to say with such certainty then, yes, my love. Later, I would write in my diary that, we don't always get to choose the endings to the stories we set out to tell for ourselves. I wanted to give insight into what it was like for me to have to discover queer intimacy like all the way in my mid 30s. And it really turned into this love letter to my best friend. And no matter who flirted first or who pulled away last, we held on to the hope that we would find each other in the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Noki. So take a moment and send Noki a note of affirmation or support. If you're viewing on the Campfire at Home website, you can do so using the drop-down menu, or you can send a text message to the number on your screen. So let's take a moment and give a virtual round of applause for all of our storytellers tonight. And thank you for tuning in. Now we are going to read a small handful of some of the affirmations that you all have been sending in to our storytellers tonight. To Grace. What a world. Today, I only wish to emulate you. You are beautiful inside and out. And when I grow up, I want to be like you, no joke. I love you, and I thank God for my sobriety today. To Lizzie. Lizzie, wow, your description of landing in a foreign country and feeling like a young child again is beautiful and visceral. Thank you for sharing a beautiful story about searching for home, solutions, and clarity. Katie. Thank you for painting a beautiful picture of a magnificent place, overwhelming experience, and finding a moment of clarity. Such a lovely story. Congratulations on landing your dream job. Noki. Beautiful story, heart emoji. So honest and real and lovely. Thank you for sharing. Let's give one more virtual round of applause for all of our storytellers tonight. and thank you all for tuning in. While this is not our first online capstone, this is the first time using the online theater space, campfireathome.com. And while the circumstances of a pandemic are not ideal, we are so grateful to be able to offer our classes and events in new, widely accessible ways. If you watched what you saw tonight and thought, hey, maybe I want to do this too, you're in luck. Our next online Intro to Storytelling class begins on October 25th, and it is currently accepting enrollments. While the intro class does not culminate in a public capstone event, it is the foundational stepping stone to take the advanced class and ultimately have a capstone night. Intro to Storytelling is an opportunity to engage in deep self-reflection and to reframe and rethink narratives about ourselves. And while it is deeply introspective and personal, it is also a group cohort experience. As a cohort, we work together towards shared goals and we develop new connections and friendships with our classmates. So again, the next class begins on October 25th. And if you're watching tonight from our Campfire at Home website, simply scroll down below to where it says upcoming events and click on Intro to Storytelling. And of course, you can also check us out on Facebook and Instagram. So thank you again to all of you tuning in. And thank you for showing up to support these storytellers and joining us tonight. We appreciate you all. And we hope that as you continue about your daily life in this time of immense uncertainty, that you encounter the stories that you need to hear and you tell the stories that you need to tell. Until next time, good night.